Let's look a little at the domains that makes up the CISSP certification and is what you're testing on. The CISSP certification has 8 domains, or they can also be referred to 8 common bodies of knowledge, or CBKs. Domain 1, Security and Risk Management, makes up 15% of the weighted questions on the exam. In Domain 1, we're going to be looking at security, risk, compliance, the laws we have to follow, the regulations, and our business continuity. We'll be covering confidentiality, integrity, and availability, or the CIA triad, security governance principles, compliance we have to follow, the legal and regulatory issues, our professional ethics, the security policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines we need to adhere to, who makes them, and how we implement them. We're going to be looking at business continuity requirements, personnel security policies. We're going to be looking at how we do risk management and how we do threat modeling. How, when we acquire other companies or we divest into multiple companies, what are the security and risk considerations? And then finally, how we manage our IT security training and raise awareness with our employees. Then we move into Domain 2, Asset Security, where we look at identifying our assets, giving them classifications, and look at their vulnerabilities. We do quantitative and qualitative risk analysis, find the vulnerabilities on our systems, and determine appropriate countermeasures. We're going to look at ownership, data ownership, system ownership, data custodians. We're going to look at privacy protection, how we back up and keep our data, the retention we choose, our data security controls, and then finally our handling requirements. How do we mark it? How do we label it? How do we store it? And even though what we cover in Domain 2 is not very much, it still makes up 10% of the questions. In Domain 3, I have to warn you, Domain 3 is huge. Prior to the 2015 changes of the exam, there were 3 domains. They were mushed into one, which is now the monster Domain 3. And for me, really, Domain 3 has 3 logical parts from the old domains: security, engineering and models, cryptography, and physical security. In the security engineering part, we're going to be looking at the engineering processes using security design principles, security evaluation models, and we're going to look at security architecture, design, and solution elements and their vulnerabilities, web-based vulnerabilities, mobile system vulnerabilities, and then finally embedded devices and their vulnerabilities. And that really is the first major portion of Domain 3. Then we'll move into cryptography, and this is what most people think IT security is. But we all know it's so much more. We're going to be looking at the history of cryptography as well as current uses, asymmetric, symmetric, hashing, digital signatures, and many other things. And then we're going to round out Domain 3 with physical security. What can we do to make our facilities and our sites as physically secure as possible? Really, the cornerstone of IT security is a layered defense, or an onion defense, or defense in depth. They're all words for the same thing, but if you use the analogy of an onion, for each layer you peel away, there's another layer. That's how our security needs to be implemented. And in many cases, physical security is the outer layer. That's the fences we have, the gates, the walls, the doors, all the physical elements we put in place to make sure we are, well, secure. Domain 4, Communications and Network Security, is also a big domain. It's the second largest on the certification. This is our networks. This is how we connect our devices, how we're on the internet, and how we secure it. We're going to be looking at secure networking architecture and design, how we use IP protocols, non-IP protocols, how we segment off our networks, the ports we use, how IPs work, IPv4, IPv6, NAT, PAT, and all the added security methods we've had to add because both the internet and IPv4, which is the most commonly used protocol, were never designed to be secure. They assumed that the connections the data was sent over was always secure. There was no need to design security into the protocols, which at the time was true, but it has evolved. And because of that lack of security, we needed to add many different protocols to give us security, as well as extend how long we can keep using IPv4. IPv4 has about 4 billion IP addresses we can use, but there are about 8 billion devices online today. Most of those are cell phones. So to fix that problem, most cell phones in the world are on IPv6, which has security signed in. It may be different in your country, but I know for a fact that all the major cell phone providers in the United States are all using IPv6. You'll never notice. As long as your phone is online, we're all good. So the places we mostly use IPv6 are behind the scenes. We're going to be looking at how we secure our network components, the cabling we use, how we establish secure communication channels over an unsecure network like the internet. Then we're going to cover some of the attacks on our networks and the data we transmit. Domain 5 is Identity and Asset Management, and Domain 5 makes up 13% of the questions on the certification. We're going to be looking at physical and logical access control. We're going to be looking again at the IAAA model, identification, authentication, authorization, and accounting. What do we use to identify someone, let them in the building, to access programs? How do we ask them to prove who they are? Passwords, biometrics. Once we've confirmed they are who they say they are, how do we give them access to what they need? And then finally accounting or auditing, where we can track an action to a subject, giving us non-repudiation. If Bob's computer was used to log in from Bob's home IP address to our network using Bob's credentials and downloading sensitive data, Bob can't really refute doing so. We'll be looking at identity as a service over the cloud, or third-party identity services. We're going to look at some of the common attacks and access control, and we're going to be looking at the life cycle of identity and access provisioning. That rounds out Domain 5. Domain 6, Security Assessment and Testing, makes up 12% of the weighted questions on the exam. This is where we test, are we actually as secure as we think we are and should be? In most cases, the answer is no. We do look at how we do the assessments, how we do the testing. This is where we do penetration testing. We hire someone from the outside to try to attack our network, see how far they can get. We look at our security process data. We test our security controls. We look at the outputs from our tests. We both do this manually and automated. And then we look at the vulnerabilities on our security architecture. And in the penetration testing, we're going to look at both physical intrusion, where they try to get into our facilities, logical intrusion, where they try to hack into our systems, as well as social engineering. People in general want to be helpful. It's much easier to have someone tell you their password than it is to hack it. And when we talked about training and raising awareness of our employees in one of the earlier domains, this is where the rubber meets the road. If we have managed to raise the awareness of our employees, they will be able to spot a social engineering attack. If not, well, then the attack is probably going to be successful. Domain 7 is similar to Domain 3. It's a large domain, and it's really made up of two major parts. Part 1 is all the preventative measures we take to ensure we're not breached. We do that through monitoring, logging, and obviously auditing both of those. Logging everything really does nothing if you don't look at the logs. We look at our patch management, our vulnerability management, our incident management. If something happens, how do we react to it? How do we handle change management? And then the other big part is business continuity and disaster recovery. And a disaster doesn't have to be our facility burnt down or someone hacked all our systems. It can just be a snowstorm. If you're in an area where snowstorms aren't normal and everybody's snowed in for a couple of days, that is a disaster. How do we ensure that we keep functioning as an organization when staff can't get to work? And the approach we choose obviously depends on what we do. If we're a call center, then can we switch to another one in a different location? If we're a hospital, really dependent on your scenario and the organization you're in, what do we do to keep the lights on if something happens? And then we'll go through all the scenarios of things that are likely to happen. What if there's an earthquake? What if there's an attack? What if? And then when we've gone through all the scenarios, then we'll look at how can we mitigate that? What can we do to stay operational if this happens? And as part of the business continuity and the disaster recovery, we're going to touch on employee safety and physical security again, because they are integral parts of our BCP. And the final and 8th domain, software development security. Most software designed today, security is an afterthought. It's something we add later when we're done. But in actuality, it needs to be a requirement, just like the functional requirements of the software. It is, however, often cut out to save on money or time. But in 2 years, when your software is compromised and you get sued for $50 million, you might realize spending an extra month and an extra $200,000 would have been worth it. We're going to be looking at the security in the software development lifecycle, the different project management approaches we can have to software development, the security controls we'd use in our development environment, and how we test the security of the software once it's done. And then finally, we're going to look at how we ensure that the software we don't develop ourselves, but will go out and buy, is secure enough for our organization. And those are the 8 CISSP domains that you're going to see on the certification exam. But remember, not all questions are created equally. Depending on how difficult ISC² think a question is, it'll be rated higher or lower. So whereas say on Domain 8, it's 10% of the questions, it is really 10% of the weighted questions. I hope this has helped you understand a little bit more about the 8 domains on the CISSP certification and how they work together. Really, Domain 1 is the foundation that all the other domains build on top of. And all the domains are interconnected and are part of our layered defense. If we have great defense on everything and we don't have any physical security, we're very vulnerable. If we have great everything else, but our applications and our software have huge security holes, well, then all the rest of it doesn't really matter.